and welcome to a brand new episode of The Latest Thread. In this episode, this time we're going to share with you some of our own most memorable personal quilts, some of the things that maybe have some good stories attached to them or a little journey. We just want to share with you some of the things and you have a peek into our own personal quilting lives. So we're going to start with sharing some pictures and we'll just take turns telling you all about them. And who's first? Here we go.
Okay, so that's mine. And yeah, it's a very, very traditional quilt. Obviously, it's a log cabin quilt, and I wanted to make something special for my husband, who's an over-the-road truck driver. So he spends much of his time in his home, away from home, which is his truck. So I saw this line of flannel fabrics, and I wanted him to have something really cuddly, cozy. Yeah, and I have to tell you, log cabin blocks are one of my favorites in different variations. Very basic, very traditional. But I purchased jelly rolls for this particular project. And I would think, or I thought that it would be very easy to arrange them and put them together in a way that, defines the layout. Well, not so much. I rearranged these blocks probably 500 times, or even putting them together. I struggle with that, when there's not, I think the problem is when you buy a jelly roll, they're just too much to get close together in scale and value to really achieve what you want to achieve. But aside the point, I was excited to finish that and just quilted it with an edge to edge. And then the next picture, you see the finished project and the recipient. And he really he loved it, and he's still, this is a couple years old, he loves it because he gets to snuggle up, because whether it's warm or cold outside, he'll be out there, spending the night in his truck. So he had a little bit of me along with him. So that's why, to me, that was even though it's a very basic quilt, it was a special quilt. And this quilt here was also special for many reasons. Um, we decided a few years ago to Jody and another friend of ours, Nancy Gano, we decided to do an applique book, and we each decided to design several of the quilts that were going to be part of this book from start to finish. And it, happened the way we wanted to. It was accepted by AQS at the time and they published it. But why it's special to me on many levels was all the little stories, the ups and downs behind creating this project. And I know Jody can probably chime into that, from last minute, because we were going to meet the publisher at Paducah at the quilt show. We rented a cabin. We're still finishing up our drawings. Very last minute. We had the meeting the next day. I mean, all the little stories. So it really wasn't about the finished product at some point. It was totally about the journey, because none of us had ever done anything like that on that level, and it brought us, closer together, as friends. And there was another friend, even though she didn't participate officially, she was in the background, our supporter. And, it was just a really cool experience, I thought. And that was one of my quilts called Configuration. Um, I remember being yet at another hotel at another quilt show, trying to lay out those big pieces, trying to make them fit together. We're crawling on the floor with an iron, trying to glue these big pieces down, in a hotel room floor. I mean, those stories, in the background of all that, I'll never ever forget. So that's why I love that quilt. And we were going to do a second book, and then things happened. But I love this quilt because of how graphic, the design is. I like it because, I'm one that always worked off a pattern, and being able to create something from start to finish was super challenging for me. And this whole experience with the book before allowed me to do others, designing them, on graph paper, and the whole process, a lot of fun. So those quilts are a big part of my quilting journey. That's all I got.
This one's me. Those chubby little feet. I was like, dude, my feet are really chubby there. He has chubby feet. So this is I don't remember what episode it was. We were talking about making the quilt that actually had some kind of a meaning. And this is the only one I've ever made like that. And I vowed to make more because I really liked it better than just making something because whatever. I like this, I'm going to make it. But I had been looking for some kind of picture. I don't even remember now what I was looking for, but I came across this picture. And this was in my grandparents' house, way back in the 60s, whenever. And I saw that stereo. And it's funny because my son at that time was trying to find one. He wants one for his house. So I looked at the picture of it and I'm like, so it's I wouldn't have it, but it's pretty cool. You can move them apart. You can put them wherever you want. There's 3 separate pieces. So I decided I'm going to make a quilt, but obviously it couldn't just look like that. So then I doodled and man, I spent a lot of time because I already knew this was like to honor my grandfather. And so it really just made me get, I don't know, you know how that is. When something means something, now you're overly thinking every part of it. So that was the design. So you can kind of see it has the 3 pieces and then the stands go from top to bottom. And I couldn't, of course, decide on color, but ultimately I went with the yellowish color. Putting it together was not easy at all. And I know there's hardly anything to it, but it was applique and pieced. And so it was all great on paper until I actually had to make the pieced things match up to applique, which is, cut freehand. But then I quilted it and I didn't have a stitch regulator. And I was confident I can do this. I didn't have an extended base, but I can do a ruler, just some straight lines. Well, that lasted all of 20 lines. And I'm like, yeah, no, this is just way too much work. Because, when you don't have a regulator, I'm stopping and starting and stopping and starting. And, your finger forgets what it's going to do. And it's just like, yep, here we go. But I marked every single line, so that made it a little bit easier. I just could try to stay on them. So that was quilting it. And here you can see kind of, on that white part, on the black, on that one corner, you can kind of see where I had to piece these things together. And it was like white and black. And, the seam needs to go where it should go so you don't see it under the white, but that wasn't where it could go, if that makes sense. So it was just like, a thing. And I undid and redid until I finally was like, okay, this is the best I can do. And, that was that. And then it's funny because in our last episode, we talked to Kelly I don't know if anyone remembers, but she has an 18. Well, so did I did at this time. And so I had to get super creative because what I decided to quilt really wasn't going to work, because with 18 inches, I wasn't stopping and starting every line. So that's kind of how the quilting design got chosen, because those larger things that come out, it was just there so that that could break all the long lines up. So I was able to do it with my 18. And, I think sometimes limit is a bonus because, it makes you think a little more creatively. And then there it is. And I'll never forget, I finished this, and I'm weird. Like, I like to see the full effect of something. I'm like, okay, but I don't want to see it. So I hung it up on the thing and tried not to really look at it. And then I backed away so I wasn't looking at it. And I got real far back and turned around to get that full effect. Like, I've never seen this whole thing before. And it was like awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome. Yeah, I mean, and the other part of it, and I'm sure you guys have all heard it before, I entered this in a show and I saw a picture online and I'm like, what the heck? They hung my quilt up upside down at the quilt show. I have to go look. Maybe they reversed the picture. I don't know what. I put the sleeve on the wrong end. It was meant to have the little yellow, was supposed to be on the left. I was like, what the heck? Seriously? But then my son looked at it and he's like, Mom, it's better this way anyways, because you look at anything the same way you read, left to right. He said, so you look and process the nothingness and it takes you to the design. And I'm like, perfect. Total accident, but it worked out good. So
The universe told you where that sleeve needed to be.
crazy.
But
Yeah, and I would say that's probably my absolute favorite quilt. And so it's called Grandpa's Model 20, which is that stereo is called a Model 20.
But did you said you wanted to honor your grandfather? Maybe I missed it, but did you mention that your grandfather designed that stereo that this is based on?
No, he didn't design the stereo.
He didn't?
Mm-mm.
Because he did design other
Oh
things
yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah, that's what he did. He was an industrial designer, but not that. But they just had it because you know how, so both of my grandparents, one was the grandparents you go over and they had the velvet couch with the plastic thing all over it, the cover, because you're not allowed to sit on it, the actual couch, and then, the antiques. But these grandparents were the hip, cool, because I think he was a designer, they had all the modern 60s stuff. So, it's just two whole different things, Yeah.
Well,
Rainbow.
it's rainbow. This is so far out of my spectrum, but, and it's funny because this was such an unplanned thing. And it's actually not my favorite quilt, but it's my most memorable because I pieced it while my mom was here and she helped. So like, she used to sew clothes. I'm a quilter. There was wine involved, lots of laughing, and okay, it's bad of me to say, but I don't know if it's me not reading the words and just looking at pictures or the wine, but this was a poorly written pattern.
According to Karen, right?
Well, no, even my mother read it and she's like, what do they mean here? So I had all these, again, jelly rolls of brights and then grays. So I thought it would work great for this pattern. So that's all the pieces lining them up. And that's actually my mama. I'm piecing and she's pressing. And there was way too much laughing involved. So I knew there would be bad seams. And you'll see that as we go on. But there are some bad seams in here. But it didn't matter. Because it was like, we did this in, I guess, about 2.5 days. And it was awesome. Because we'd wake up and she's like, we're going to finish piecing. I'm like, sure are. So, go ahead, Sharon. So that's more of the pieces coming together. And it's for her to see that concept of you had this nice fabric, you put it together, now we're cutting it in half and cutting it up. And but it turns out, she got that little quilty view where she's like, oh, look what it did. I'm like, yeah, I know that was going to happen. And I laugh because I printed out a paper and I marked my layout. And if you look at the colors in the plan layout and you look at the actual layout, they're nothing like each other. But that's how I wanted that gray bars around there. And then just more piecing, which she kind of thought that was pretty cool, watching it be born. And then pressing, and then I loaded it on the frame. And I actually, on the next one, I tried one of the first few patterns that I digitized. I put on this, and it was awesome. And I'm standing there watching it and watching it and watching it. And then in the next picture, Sharon, on the very last row, it hit one of those drunken seams.
Oh no.
And it ripped it. But it's I don't have a finished picture, which I have to find the quilt. But I took all the scraps of the bright colors and I made different circles and I appliqued them all over randomly. Not all over, there's like 7 of them.
Nice.
But I covered that whole, and then there's one on the back, just so that I remember that's the boo-boo. So, and then it's bound with all the scraps of the brights. But I don't have that because I didn't take a picture.
So does that quilt live with your mom now?
No, it stays here.
Does she sleep under it when she visits?
No, she has one that matches her room. But this is,
Oh.
it's just, I don't know. It's the energy that's involved in the quilt that is my memory. It's not actually like my favorite pattern or my favorite colors, but it's all just the energy of putting it together and the laughs and the memories.
Was that the only quilt you've ever done together, or have
Yes.
there been others?
No, just that one.
Wow, that makes it special for sure.
Yeah.
So she didn't decide to become a quilter then.
No, she just likes watching from afar. Yeah. So it's that.
So these are a start of mine. And it's funny, like, I think that when we're making our own quilts, any quilt, as a matter of fact, there's things that are going on in our lives that make you more sentimentally attached to the quilts than you might have been otherwise. Maybe the pattern isn't something that you're particularly drawn to, but because it was born, like Karen said, or it happened during a time you were, something awesome or something maybe traumatic was happening. It just, your feelings get, attached to those quilts. This is one where I made 100, I think there's 3,600 little 1-inch squares in the whole quilt. And
Wow.
and none of the fabrics are repeated anywhere else. So there's like 263, including the sashing, the backing, the binding. There's like 263 different fabrics in the quilt.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
And what's special about it to me was that it came along on a trunk show with me, and right before the trunk show, like literally like 2 days before the trunk show. And we use all the quilts, like every quilt in our house pretty much is used and washed and used and washed, and they get, wrinkled and worn and torn and the binding comes off, and we just love them, right? But this one, I had poured myself a really, really full glass of wine. And
Is there any other kind?
Is there any other kind? And it was one of the ones where they didn't have a stem, where they were just like a bowl, right? And they're not supposed to spill as easy, but when you have a toddler that runs at you and knocks it over, then it spills. So I had this kind of draped over me and a little bit on the floor, and I was renting a place at the time when my daughter was really small, and there was white carpet in this rental, which is crazy dumb, but whatever, it was there. And my daughter came over and decided that at that moment she wanted a hug, and it had to happen like right then. And she came over and ran up to me, mommy, came and got this hug, but knocked the wine over that was sitting on the floor. Duh, that was probably my bad. And on the quilt and on the white carpet, I didn't care about the carpet so much as the quilt, but I didn't have any knowledge on how to get wine out of a quilt. And so it came along with me on the trunk show with the wine stain. the red wine stain. And I thought, well, gosh, this group of quilters will probably have enough knowledge to tell me what I'm supposed to do with it to fix it. And so I held the quilt up and I asked, and there's this little elderly lady at the front, and she stood up and she said, don't you dare try to take that stain out, because every time you look at it, you are going to remember the hug that your daughter came over to give you.
Mm-hmm.
And we all just kind of had one of those aw moments where it was like, yeah, you know what? I'm keeping that. I'm keeping it right there for that reason. And honestly, to this day, I cannot even find the stain. Like, it's been washed and used so much. I hunt for it. I cannot even find it. It's just gotten lighter and lighter and lighter over the years with the washes and use. It's, yeah. But whenever I snuggle up in this quilt, that's what it's like, wrapping myself up in a hug. So that one. Okay, so my next quilt, this quilt was done almost 10 years ago now. And I ran a mystery quilt on Facebook years ago, just for fun. And to kind of set off the kind of feel and the theme of it, the name of the quilt was called Plenty of Fish, which happens to be an online dating site. And so when I was writing the pattern and releasing the steps for the quilt, I decided to do something extra cheesy. And I wrote a cheesy love story. It was like a 1-2 page chapter. Every time I released a step, you got a new chapter of this story that I was just literally making up as I went along, just for a kind of a fun element. And it was about this woman who goes online to find this man, and they fall in love. And in the story, I needed a man's profile. So I went on to Plenty of Fish, and I was a single woman at the time. And I went on to Plenty of Fish and was perusing these men's profiles to find one that was just perfect for the story. And that ended up being how I met my now husband, Jason, because I found his profile. And his isn't what I ended up using in the story. But this quilt in particular is literally, symbolizes how we met. And so, nothing overly spectacular about the quilt itself, but again, it's everything that was going on at the time, and that quilt will just never leave this house. It'll always be super special to me. So not as many pieces in it as the previous ones, but I do like scrappy.
Yeah, your math would just kill me. Counting your fabrics, I'd be like, I'm done.
But I don't count. Like, when I pull fabrics for a quilt, I don't pull, like, if it says you need 3 meters of this and 4 meters of that, I don't pull it all at the same time. I pull like maybe 1/2 to 2/3 of what the full requirement is. And then I force myself to go back into my stash to pull more things when I run out to add into it. And then I just end up getting this really awesome, eclectic kind of look that is unexpected. And it's a fun part of the journey for me, is that whole fabric picking part. Surprisingly, this is the Tula Pink City Sampler quilt, which almost every other one that I've seen, I think maybe I've seen 1 or 2 done in reproduction fabrics, but most of the ones that I've seen are done in moderns and solids and Tula Pink fabrics. And what was special about this one for me was that the same daughter that spilt the wine on my other quilt that I talked about, actually picked all of the fabrics for each individual block in this quilt. And I picked them up and trusted and just sewed them together. So, oops, that's the back. I think I have a picture of the front close up too. I love text in fabric too. And that one just was perfect for the backing. Oh, I thought I had a close up of it, but I guess I don't. So I'll just go a little closer. So every block was just its own individual combination. And like I said, I just let her choose, and I didn't change a thing. I just picked them up and sewed them. And the layout was a little bit different too, because the layout of this one, like in the book, if anybody's done that City Sampler, that 100 modern blocks, this layout is called the trellis, because it has this kind of plus sign sashing. But in the book, it was, this was light, like this big plus cross sign was a light fabric. And then around the blocks was dark. So I just switched the values of that because when I put a dark fabric beside my blocks just kind of disappeared. So I framed them with a light one instead and put the dark one as the plus sign. So I share this with people sometimes. They're like, that layout's not in the book, but changing the position of the values can totally change the look of a quilt too. So, and actually this one is quilted with, normally I wouldn't do this on edge to edge quilting, but this has got the layer of 80-20 and the wool on top. So I just really wanted the feathers and the curls to just really rise up. And it's the first time I'd ever tried that on doing it on an edge to edge, and I really liked it. So not just for custom quilting. So, and that was the back, which we've already seen. Awesome. So those are our quilts and our stories. I know you guys probably have your own special stories attached to your own special quilts. And gosh, if you want to share them in one of the Facebook groups and tell us about them, we'd love to see the quilts and hear your stories. Sometimes we can identify with them and relate. It's just like music, right? There's something like somebody will write a song and you'll have your own meaning and interpretation of what it means to you, where it could be something totally different from the person who wrote the song initially. So I think quilts is the same way. So art touches us all individually. So yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time on the latest thread.
Bye.
Bye.